So we, you know, how we do that shit, you know? Yo, We can figure that shit out in person, you know what I mean? Don't need to flash that micro. There you go. Details online in line with what you said last week. What? Super yeah. Super everything turns out like everything turns out ownership can't think back to the grand ownership Homestead Act of 1862. Try to create the concept of privatizing the land that's Eureka! I found it. Eureka! Whoa, wow. Why the lights off? Oh shit, bro. Oh shit. Try to chitty bang 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 chitty go go chitty go go go. My father's pee. My father. My father's pee. Fucking hell. My father's pee. Back here. I got all the last shit, bro. Pee. Go for that life. Go twice. Can you decide how you want him to break your sex? I beg this time. Go 100 times. Go. Don't understand. What you mean? You said I'll be here when you come down. Go 2 times. Hell yeah, go 2 times. Come back and go out twice. Woo. Guess what? Loaded. You popped that ass up for that G.r.a. What can I do? Go to a Spetz and I buy everything for you. I'm crazy for you. Ooh, what can I do? I can't walk all over me till I'm black and blue. Go all the time. You gonna have just come back this side. Yeah, what? Maybe she needs a break. She's hot. Yeah. Don't touch the bitch, dude. She's really on fire. She's the hottest object in the house. You're clipping my wings. You said I'll be here for you. No, not finished. Come on. She needs a break. Wait, unplug her. Let's unplug her. Okay. Wait. She needs a break. I'm not gonna lie. She needs a brown. I love your outfit so sad. No, I'm scared. It's hella dangerous. I hate things. It's dangerous.
I'm crazy for you. Clipping my window. I guess do some more. I like noise. I guess do some more. I like noise. I like noise. I guess do some more. I like noise. I guess do some more. I'm crazy for you. Bring clips. I guess do some more. I guess do some more. I like noise. I guess do some more. I like noise. I like noise.
You got that shit, bro. Oh! How you get the ass all of them jeans, girl? Oh my god.
I get do some. I like.
Hi, Bukuti. You know what I mean? Ooh.
I guess do some.
I got these.
I like. I guess do some. I like noise.
I smoking them. Yeah.
Clipping my window. I guess do some. I like noise.
Say that? Say what?
I like noise.
Fuck the people. Hey, can you write Diego's full name out here? Something like that one. Yeah, bro, I'm down, bro. Do it! Can you write it down for me? I don't know how to do that, bro. How many names? 7? Can you write that down? You guys want this body? That's so funny. Roberto Delizali. No. You like that Kappa, girl. You like that Kappa, girl. You like that. He likes that Kappa, girl. No! Roberta likes it. Kappa, girl. Roberta likes Kappa, girl. So you come back and go, lick. So it came back to us a lick right now. Can you imagine? He's just licked right now. He's just, oh, you do okay.
Important. Okay. Settings. Accessibility. Accessibility. Back. Access. Settings. Back button. Voiceover. On. Button. Voiceover. On. Button. Voice speech. Button. Braille. Button.
Oh yeah, boy.
Output. 8 dot. Uncontracted assistive touch. SoundCloud. Double tap to open. SoundCloud.
Yeah,
Double
bro.
tap to open. 1:36 p.m. One notification. 1:36 Wednesday. 20 iPhone. Deadweed Sifascal BTCHZ Dripsitire. And Frank Fresno Cornpix. X. Semicolon G.R.A. Dot M. $. Pantaleon. SoundCloud. Button. Double tap to launch now playing app. Use 3D touch to show more controls. iPhone. Deadweed. iPhone. Deadweed Sifascal. Show playback destination. iPhone. Deadweed Sifascal BTCHZ Dripsitire. And iPhone. Deadweed Sifascal BTCHZ Dripsitire. And Frank Fresno Cornpix. Next Instagram. Magwadu. Next track. Button. Next track. Open controls. 1:30 22 iPhone. Deadweed assistive touch. Assistive touch menu. SoundCloud. Double tap to open. Use 3D touch to show home screen edit mode. Activate the edit mode. Setting 1 note 20 iPhone. Show playback.
Don't ask bitch, I ain't fucking with you.
Set value $in G.R.A. Dot M. $. Next track.
Yeah, bro.
Button. Use 3D touch to show more controls. Next track. Button. Use 3D assistive touch menu. Assistive touch menu. Assistive touch menu. Assistive touch menu. 1:38 p.m. 1:38 p.m. 1:38 p.m. 1:38 p.m. Wednesday. iPhone. Show track as previous track. Pause. Button. Use 3D touch to show more track position. 52.9 next track. But play. Button. Play. Track position. 52.9 seconds. On. Track assistive touch. Assist. 1 settings. Now. 1:38 p.m. 1:38 p.m. Wednesday. iPhone. Button. Play. Button. Use 3D touch to show play. Play. Open controls. One notification. 1:39 p.m. Wednesday. Settings. Press home. Press page 2 of 3. Adjustable. Page 2 of 3. Page 2 of 3. Camera. Page 3 of 3. Adjustable. Viewfinder. One face. Right edge. 0p. Assistive touch. Assistive touch menu. Assistive touch menu. 139. Messenger. Messenger. Now. Loading. Flow. Thanks for looking. Mora. We will find a solution. Flow. Also. talking German the whole time. Sorry baby, I am usually not like that. Back. 2 on back. 2 on red assistive touch. Assistive touch menu. Double tap to open the menu.
Yeah, bitch.
Assist. Mail. Books. Dismiss context menu. Books. Double tap to open. Use 3D touch to show home
Did I see
screen
Nika?
actions.
Where?
Actions available.
What happened? She posted them? Hi, Nika!
Book.
These are the girls.
Reading
What the fuck are you
now.
talking about?
Heading. Library. Library. Tab. 2 of 5. Cover of 2666. English thesis. Cover of 2666. Table of Page 1. Page 1. Page 2666. English thesis. Graham Hort. May 2013. The meaninglessness of life as projected into a three-dimensional Roman surface through an array of disparate semblances constructed in 2666. The meaninglessness. Graham Hort. Department of English, University of California, Berkeley. Independent Senior Thesis Advisor, Mitchell Breitwieser. May 2013. Independent Department of English Page Chooser. Page Chooser. Page Chooser. Table of Contents. Button. A special thanks to Professor Mitchell Breitwieser, UC Berkeley, my thesis advisor. PhD candidate Alok g.r.a, UC Berkeley, my English. Professor Raymond Lifches, UC Berkeley, my adopted academic father. PhD candidate Julie Flicker, UC Berkeley, my geography mentor. MTS candidate L0wR Duke, my PhD Gina Zupsich, UC Berkeley, former professor introduced me to Jerry and Rabelais. Peter Inspire Restu, Music 1 to make the fingers go, type. 1 particularly the entire Fabric 68 album. My parents, they are so lovely. Page Chooser, 2 of 50. 2006 Port 2. Table of Contents, button. Select page 3. Page 3. Under white clouds. Sheila P. Pisser out of all this beauty something must come. Ezra Pound. The Cantos Canto LXXXIV. Search. Button. Library. Button. Cover of 2666. Table of content. Select page 4. Page 4. Image of a Roman surface. Image. 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 Table of content. Page 5. Page 5. Reality as projected onto a three-dimensional Roman surface. Image. Image. Table of contents. Button. Page 6. Page 6. Introduction. The heart of the matter is knowing whether evil, or sin or crime or whatever you want to call it, is random or purposeful. If it's purposeful, we can fight it. It's hard to defeat, but we have a chance. Like two boxers in the same weight class. More or less. If it's random, on the other hand, we're fucked. And we'll just have to hope that God, if he exists, has mercy on us. And that's what it all comes down to. Roberto Bolaño, The Savage Detectives. 420. Roberto Bolaño's posthumous novel 2666 creates its own reality that sets to mimic, provoke, and critique reality itself. The text's main tool of provocation is the production and arrangement of semblances, which, at a rudimentary level, are identified as mere representations of a thing already in existence. by establishing 4 distinct semblances: sensuality, existence itself, identity, and death, in 4 of the novel's parts, set in contrast to the last part. Part 5. 2666 fuses together the aforementioned semblances to construct a reality of its own, or, as better articulated, a semblance of reality. Settings. Now. Model with which this reality, when applied to geometric theory, projects itself as a cell. Intersecting 3-dimensional model known as a Roman surface. 2666's production of a semblance of reality, identified in geometric terms. Landscape. Portrait. Semblance of reality, identified in geometric terms as a Roman surface, exists merely as a model with which to extract the basic theorem of 2666, that reality, whether viewed as a semblance or as reality itself, can only sustain the consistency of meaninglessness. This paper aims to represent the semblances proffered in the first 4 parts of the novel, provide a critique of their inherent meaninglessness, and challenge the constructed argument of a viable alternative to a life submerged in such semblances. To the O.E.D. defines meaninglessness as the state or condition of being meaningless, absence of meaning or purpose. O.E.D. Table of search. No service. Table of content. Page 7. Page 7. Surface. The poetics of surfaces. Within a given space, which can be broadly identified as a logical conceptual form, or structure, serving as a medium in which other forms and some structures are realized. There can either be the presence of objects or the absence of objects. Alexandrov. Before we can differentiate the qualitative and theoretical qualifications that render this object binary in a given space, we must first determine which form of object we are referring to. Philosophy tends to distinguish the nature of objects into 2 categories, abstract and concrete, with numbers and the other objects of pure mathematics representing the abstract, whereas rocks and trees and human beings occupying the concrete. Rosen. However, to complicate matters, there is also the shared characteristic of both abstract and concrete objects being signified as entities, which is something that can exist on its own. Whether the object is material or immaterial doesn't matter, because an entity need not be animate in order to be qualified as an entity. Entities merely exist in relation to all the aforementioned objects. All entities possess a surface, or surfaces. For a material object, a surface can be signified as the outer layer boundary of its form, or the exterior, whether in reference to its extent or texture. On the other hand, immaterial surface. 3 objects possess surfaces that are 2-dimensional manifolds. Topology distinguishes the surface of an object as either a 2-dimensional surface on a flat plane or a 3-dimensional model wherein the surface of an object exists on a projected global plane. 3 manifolds are the 3-dimensional analogues of any given surface. In a sense, these are the constructed models that turn a 2-dimensional surface into 3-dimensional model. The particular surface that this paper explores as a metaphorical placeholder for Roberto Bolaño's novel, 2666, is the Roman surface, also known as the Steiner surface. Table of content. Selected. Page 8. Page 8. Likened to the Roman surface is a self-intersecting, self-contained, topological mapping of the real projective plane into 3-dimensional space that contains a high level of symmetry. The structure of this surface, which is one of the 3 possible surfaces produced by sewing a Mobius 4 strip to the edge of a disk, contains 4 round lobes, each placed in 4 separate 5 corners of a tetrahedron. Combined, the 4 round lobes of the Roman surface can be likened to represent the 4 semblances presented in 4 parts of 2666 that form the entirety of the self-intersecting 3-dimensional model, or novel. which in the case of 2666 can be identified as the investigated and exposed semblances set in contrast to the mimetic pivot of part 5. In total, my paper argues that 2666's stylistic hyperrealism as produced through an array of semblances mimics the self-intersecting construction and form of a Roman surface, which, in itself, is yet another semblance of reality. The operative pivot in 2666 as a Roman surface, i.e., combination of semblances, reality as a semblance. Everything is real, at least in appearance. Roberto Bolaño. Confucian process. Before we define and catalogue the semblances presented in the novel, it must be noted that the utilization of an operative placeholder or mimetic pivot in a given work of literature is neither new nor rare. Search button. Cancel, cancel, cancel button. Library. Library. Account. Account. Done. Button. Account. Cover of 2666. Light of literature is neither new nor rare. Ezra Pound, in his epic The Cantos, incorporates the Confucian process to serve as a pivot for the myriad of histories, concepts, and theories presented throughout the text. In a similar sense, Thomas Pynchon uses the Tristero 4a presented muted post-horn symbol in Crying of Lot 49 to expose various forms of communications. 4a Mobius strip is a one-sided non-orientable surface created by cutting a closed band into a single strip, giving one of the two ends thus produced a half twist, and then reattaching the two ends. Weisstein, 5 tetrahedron signified as a four-sided polyhedron, i.e., a four-sided three-dimensional solid collection of polygons joined at their edges. Weisstein. Table of Page 9. Page 9. Used in modern society that are ineffectual. The placeholder, or pivot, for a given text is meant to be a directional device as well as an operative form of organization. It is meant to centralize a meaning or purpose of the text around a given symbol or image. In the case of 2666, the positing of 4 separate semblances in the first 4 parts of the novel, which together create a Roman surface, are illuminated by the 5th part of the novel, which presents an alternative and contrast to the aforementioned semblances. What is meant by semblances 6 in relation to 2666? The text posits reality as an array of semblances, which are nothing more than the representation of a given thing in reality, emphasis on semblances being mere representations of something else. It is in these representations of objects or concepts in reality that spawns the question of whether or not the objects themselves or the representations of the objects possess more worth or validity. The concept is first introduced in Part 3, the part about fate, in a quasi-sermon delivered by a former Black Panther. Meanwhile, any star you could see from the side of Route 80, on the way from Des Moines to Lincoln, would live for probably millions of years. Either that or it might have been dead for millions of years, and the traveler who gazed up at it would never know. It might be a live star or it might be a dead star. Sometimes, depending on your point of view, he said, it doesn't matter, since the stars you see at night exist in the realm of semblance. They are semblances, the same way dreams are semblances. So the traveler on Route 80 with a flat tire doesn't know whether what he's staring up at in the vast night are stars or whether they're dreams. In a way, he said, the traveler is also part of a dream that breaks away from another dream, like one drop of water breaking away from a bigger drop of water that we call a wave. 6 from Part 5. Semblance was an occupying force of reality, he said to himself. Even the most extreme, borderline reality. It lived in people's souls and their actions, in willpower and in pain, in the way memories and priorities were ordered. Semblance proliferated in the salons of the industrialists and in the underworld. It set the rules. It rebelled against its own rules, in uprisings that could be bloody, but didn't therefore cease to be semblance. It set new rules. 706 Table of Contents. Selected. Page 10. Page 10. What's crucial here is the iteration of the term realm of semblance. The passage starts with a seemingly plausible experience expressed with material signifiers, such as Route 80 and Des Moines to Lincoln, that ground the hypothetical in an aura of realism. Connecting the semblance nature of stars to the semblance nature of dreams, and then eventually claiming the traveler is also part of a dream, likens a dream to reality in this context. Thus, reality becomes yet another semblance, a dream that breaks away from another dream, like one drop of water breaking away from a bigger drop of water that we call a wave. 252. In The Will to Power, Friedrich Nietzsche supports the theorem that appearances or semblances hold just as much weight, if not more, than the alleged reality. And in this context, the perspective that a belief is an appearance seen in perspective rather than an objective, universal truth. What is belief? How is a belief born? All belief assumes that something is true.
The extremist form of nihilism would mean that all belief, all assumption of truth is false, because no real world is at hand. Therefore, only an appearance seen in perspective, whose origin must be found in us, seeing that we are constantly in need of a narrower, shortened, and a simplified worldview.
Statements and truths. What is Nietzsche? Nietzsche assumes that the basic structure of reality isn't grounded in objective statements and truths, but rather appearance, seen in perspective because, in short, no real world is at hand. Nietzsche. This Nietzschean concept bleeds into 2666's reposition that all we interact with are semblances, and the semblances that we believe hold importance and weight should not be overvalued and projected into any realm other than that of a semblance. In relation to works of literature, 2666 posits, as if the worth, or excellence of a work were based on semblances. Semblances that vary, of course, from one era and table of contents. Button. Page 11. Page 11. Country to another, but that always remained just that. Semblances.
Can we leave in 10 minutes?
Things that only seem and never are.
I'm coming.
Things all surface and no depth. Pure gesture, and even the gesture muddled by an effort of will. 722. Following this conception of literature as a semblance, and thus reality as a semblance. Together, country to another, but that always remained just that. Semblances. Things that only seem and never are. Things all surface and no depth. Pure gesture, and even the gesture muddled by an effort of will. 722. Following this conception of literature as a semblance, and thus reality as a semblance. 2666 illustrates and critiques four semblances that humanity overestimates as being something more than a semblance. The first section of the novel, the part about the critics, deconstructs the semblance of sensuality and the nature of desire. The second section, the part about Amalfitano, exposes the semblance of existence itself. The third section, the part about fate, analyzes the semblance of identity. And finally, the fourth section, the part about the crimes, focuses on our conception of death as nothing more than a semblance. Together, these four seemingly invaluable semblances self-intersect to create a Roman surface meant to function and symbolize a semblance of reality itself. These four areas of subject are propped up and exposed as a semblance only when set in contrast to the fifth section of the novel, the part about Archimboldi. This last section of the novel, which is utilized as the pivot for the rest of text, differentiates itself from the other sections of the novel in the sense that its content is not limited to an exploration of a given semblance, but rather focuses on the limitless nature of production, or creation, which, as this paper will demonstrate, is the alternative to existing in a world of semblances. Purging the surfaces, production, the writer as the mediator between meaninglessness and meaning. Table of Bookmarked. Page 12. Page 12. Part 5 immediately cuts into the surface of semblances by describing the protagonist who spends his childhood diving through the surface of the sea. More aquatic than terrestrial. Hans Rewriter, later to be known as Archimboldi, didn't like Earth or what ordinary mortals call the sea, which is really only the surface of the sea. 639. Instead, Hans Rewriter liked the sea, that other Earth, with its plains that weren't plains and valleys that weren't valleys and cliffs that weren't cliffs. 639. Rather than fully immersing himself in a given location with its associative customs and desires, i.e., semblances, Rewriter detaches himself from all of this by channeling his innocence into an obsession with the sea, i.e.,
that other Earth.
639.
By not being caught up in the common semblances of the world, the reader is able to observe and articulate semblance of reality through writing.
The importance of Part 5 in relation to the rest of the text is not only created by the very fact that its content radically differs from the other semblances that can only produce chaos and meaninglessness, which will be discussed later in this paper, but the very style and tone of Part 5 is slowed down, fragile, and
more poetic.
Even in moments of seeming banality, the text distills a beauty that radically opposes the inherent chaos of the other parts of the novel. Sometimes, however, as they sat on a cafe terrace or around a dark cabaret table, an obstinate silence descended inexplicably over the trio. They seemed suddenly to freeze, lose all sense of time, and turn completely inward, as if they were bypassing the abyss of daily life, the abyss of people, the abyss of conversation, and had decided to approach a kind of lakeside region, a late romantic region, where the borders were clocked from dusk to dusk. 10, 15, 20 minutes, an eternity. 7. The need to write, and its intention, comes from an almost otherworldly feeling. Virginia Woolf articulated it precisely with, "I have a deeply hidden and inarticulate desire for something beyond the daily life." Woolf. 7. Table of content. Page 13. Page 13. The characters in this passage are submerged in a place and time that is highly unproductive and what Marx would claim as detrimental to the development of one's use value. However, the ineffable idealism of this moment, where the men are merely sitting silently, contains so much beauty and power that they feel as if they have bypassed the abyss of daily life and are instead transported, in their minds, to a late romantic region that escapes time itself. Set in contrast to the other parts of the novel where the characters are hungrily salvaging over sex, questions of existence and identity, and the meaning behind the act of death. Part 5 provides a character detached from such worries and semblances and is instead invested in submerging himself beneath such surfaces, water included, in order to write powerful literature. It is the contrast to the 4 self-intersecting round lobes of semblances found in the first 4 parts of the novel wherein the last part of the novel, Part 5, provides a poetic and artistic alternative to the Roman surface created by 2666 that projects a 3-dimensional model, or semblance, of reality. A note on the text, a general summary of the 5 disparate parts of 2666 would be appropriate before this paper launches into any form of argumentation. Sol Pelliz, in her article Beyond Post-Dictatorship, Transnational Latin American Literature and the Violence of Writing, provides a compacted overview of each section. The first part is entitled The Part About the Critics. It narrates the obsession of 4 European literary experts about the work of the mysterious German author Benno von Archimboldi. They end traveling to Santa Teresa City, since they think that their author is there. The second section, the part about Amalfitano, tells the story of an exiled Chilean professor of philosophy and his life in Santa Teresa. Then, the part about fate, recounts the adventures and vicissitudes of a table of contents. Page 14. New York African-American journalist called Fate who travels to Santa Teresa, and unwillingly gets acquainted and involved in the crimes against women that are happening in the city. The 4th sections is the part about the crimes and focuses on Santa Teresa, doppelganger of Ciudad Juarez, and the killing of women over there. It chronicles the finding of the murdered bodies of women. That last is the part about Archimbolid. It narrates the metamorphosis of Hans Rewriter into Benno von Archimboldi, the author, through his experiences during the Second World War in the Russian front. He ends traveling to Santa Teresa, to see his nephew who is the man accused for the crimes over there. Pellies. The last note that must be made concerns the alleged uncompleted nature of the text, which is described in 2666 as a note from the author as listed here. A note from the author says, realizing that death might be near, Roberto left instruction for his novel 2666 to be published divided into 5 books corresponding to the 5 parts of the novel, specifying the order in which they should appear, at what intervals, 1 per year, and even the price to be negotiated with the publisher. With this decision, communicated days before his death by Roberto himself to Jorge Herald, Roberto thought he was providing for his children's future. After his death, and following the reading and study of his work and notes by Ignacio Echeverria, a friend Roberto designated as high literary executor, another consideration of a less practical nature arose, respect of the literary value of the work, which caused us, together with Jorge Herald, to reverse Roberto's decision and publish 2666 first in full, in a single
It's not true,
volume,
it's just an epic.
as he would have done had his illness not taken the gravest course. 1. Sensuality. The most striking distinction between the erotic life of antiquity and our own, ellipsis, is that the ancients laid the stress upon the instinct itself, whereas we emphasize its object. The ancients glorified the instinct and were prepared on its account to honor even an inferior object, while we despise the instinctual activity in itself, and find excuses for it only in the merits of the object. And after after screwing, Sigmund Freud, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, and after screwing, me general liked to go out into the courtyard to smoke a cigarette and think about post-coital sadness, that vexing sadness of the flesh, and about all the books he hadn't read. Roberto Bolaño, The Savage Detectives. 307. Table of content. Selected. Page 15. After the very end of part 2, Amalfitano dreamed that he saw the last communist philosopher of the 20th century, Boris Yeltsin, in a pink marble courtyard 227. Approaching a crater-like structure, Yeltsin looked at Amalfitano and said, "Life is demand and supply, or supply and demand. That's what it all boils down to. But that's no way to live." 228. The semblance, or representation, of sensuality, or sex, in part 1 abides by Yeltsin's, which is simply Marx's, cold capitalistic mechanics, wherein there is an overall depersonalization within the triangular sexual escapades of the 3 characters Pelletier, Espinoza, and Liz Norton, that positions sexual intercourse as a detached act, or object, governed by extraction. The surface that this semblance proffers is one of seemingly insatiable animal appetites extracting from other seemingly insatiable animal appetites, whose effect, in total, can only produce meaninglessness. Tracing the uncharitable diagram of sexual activity, and desired activity turned into inactivity, amongst Pelletier, Espinoza, and Liz Norton reveals an approach to sexual interaction that is pure extraction of pleasure coupled by intentions bordering on unwarranted subjugation. This treatment of sexual intercourse, or sensuality, is posited as a semblance without any finality or inherent meaning. A particular moment between Pelletier and Norton mimetically catalogues the representation of sex in part 1. Liz Norton. These visits lasted only a single night. Pelletier would arrive just after 9, meeting Norton at 10 at a restaurant where he had made reservations from Paris, and by 1 they were in bed. Liz Norton was a passionate lover, although her passion was of limited duration. Not having much imagination of her own, she abandoned herself to any gain her lover suggested, without ever taking the initiative, or thinking she ought to. These sessions rarely lasted more than 3 hours. A fact that occasionally saddened Pelletier, who would gladly have screwed till daybreak after the sexual act, and this is what frustrated Pelletier most. Norton preferred to talk about academic matters rather than to look frankly at what was developing between them. To Pelletier, Norton's coldness seemed a particularly feminine mode of self-protection. Hoping to get through to her, one night he... Table of... Selected. Grid view. Page 16. Page 16. Page 2. Decided to tell her the story of his own sentimental adventures. He drew up a long list of women he had known and exposed them to her frost or indifferent gaze. Decided to tell her the story of his own sentimental adventures. He drew up a long list of women he had known and exposed them to her frost or indifferent gaze. She seemed unimpressed and showed no desire to repay his confession with one of her own. Decided, in the mornings, after he called a cab, Pelletier slipped soundlessly into his clothes so as not to wake her and headed for the airport. Before he left he would spend a few seconds watching her, sprawled on the sheets, and sometimes he felt so full of love he could have burst into tears. This passage, Bolano, 32. What must be first noted is the depersonalized language used to signify the act of sex in this passage. The dry business-like terminology of visits, sessions, sexual act, and screwed determines the character's relationship to sex as formal and detached. These four phrases signify an erasure of love or romance within the act of sex. By utilizing such impersonal language intended to represent a fully personal act limits the act to that of a selfish and almost animal desire, or as Kierkegaard posits, all pleasure is selfish. An emphasis must be placed on the temporal sequence of the narrative, which aims its terseness toward sex represented as an object. The first line totalizes the content of the narrative into a single, compacted simple sentence. These visits lasted only a single night. The rest of the passage details one such visit described in such sterile, inhumane language wherein the entire process of sexual intercourse is delineated to the impersonal detachment of a medical examination. The preceding sentence removes any descriptive signifiers that could suggest emotion between either character throughout the sentence's compacted narrative of the arrival, the meeting, and the bed. The overall tone is bleak and one-sided. These elements of cold detachment and compacted sequence force sex to be represented as an object, meaning, a function of attaining pleasure. Such an objectified conception of sex relates to a few philosophers' focus on sex as a lowly product of a bestial appetite. Kant's view that sexual desire makes of the table of page 7. Page 17.
Oh, shut up.
Person and object of
Oh, little fashion, what's up?
His notion of
Oh
the
my
temporality
god.
of sexual attraction that is labeled as a matter of
This is
transient,
dramatic.
mostly periodic, animal impulses, sobble. Although transient, these impulses carry such a powerful motive that leaves man, as Plato determined, slaves to passion and subservient to others, sobble. When Pelletier hovers over Norton watching her sprawled on the sheets, he is intensely desiring her as sexual object used to
Rick
attain
Owens to be
sexual
jelly because he gets the
instinct.
attention now.
Pleasure. For Pelletier, once he fulfills his object of desire, sex with Norton, he is not satiated, but
Can you have a little iPad?
even more perturbed by his inability to put
Yes.
iPhone storage full.
He's kind of
Settings.
blind anyway.
No, not now. Not now. Button. For Pelletier, once he fulfills his object of desire, sex with Norton,
I don't know
he
about
is not
that's true.
satiated, but rather, even more perturbed by his inability to
these
permanently
essays
secure his
interesting?
sexual object for his possession. The efforts
Yeah,
he
it's
makes
like
to create a
independent
form of relational
CNC
connection
and
with
brown.
Norton, hoping to get through to her, in order to, as Sartre
It's funny.
claims,
It's so sick.
capture the freedom of another are ineffectual when
It's
met
cool
by
hearing it like
Norton's
we've never heard it like
negation of
this.
look, eyeing, frankly at what was developing between them sobble. Norton would rather discuss academic matters, which Pelletier identifies as a particularly feminine mode of self-protection. Pelletier's attempt to capture the freedom of Pelletier is not met, because if met it could only be nugatory with nothing significant left to dominate or control. Sobble. The totalizing effect of Pelletier's unsuccessful attempts to possess Norton as a sexual object creates a sudden emptiness in each person. The product of these misfired intentions and sexual encounters. which as Murdoch states that the eros perennially and ubiquitously causes irrational behavior, is one of confused and saddened isolation, Sobel. Here is a passage that illustrates Norton's actions, and thus internal disposition, preceding a sexual encounter with Pelletier the alleged morning after. An hour later Liz Norton's alarm would sound and she'd jump out of bed. She'd. Table of content. Selected. Page 18. Page 8. Take a shower. Put water on to boil. Drink tea with milk. Dry her hair. And launch a thorough inspection of her apartment as if she were afraid that her nocturnal visitor had purloined some object of value. The living room and bedroom were almost always a wreck, and that bothered her. Impatiently, she would gather up the dirty glasses, empty the ashtrays, change the sheets, put back the books that Pelletier had taken down from the shelves and left on the floor, return the bottles to the rack in the kitchen, and then get dressed and go to the university. If she had a meeting with her department colleagues, she would go to the meeting, and if she didn't have a meeting she would shut herself up in the library to work or read until it was time for class. T. Described without Bolano, 32, determined by the bleak and almost direct transcription of Norton's daily routines. Described without emotion. This passage illustrates an overall sense of nervous energy, signified by impatiently and bothered her, coupled by a complete emptiness. First she jumps out of bed, takes a shower, boils water, drinks tea, dries her hair, cleans the apartment, gets dressed, and then goes to the university. All of these actions follow a night of sexual extraction with Pelletier, which determines their focus on sex as an object, even identified by Norton's mimetic fear that her nocturnal visitor had purloined some object of value. Without being aware of which object of value she is referring to, Norton does not realize that the object is herself, which Pelletier fashioned out of her and that leaves him pining for her in a way that leaves him on the verge of tears. It is in this way that the semblance of sex in Part 1 presents only a surface to the totality of what sex could function as, which is the production of love. Kant demonstrates that human love is goodwill, affection, promoting the happiness of others and finding joy in their happiness. Sobel. None of these ideals are fostered in Part 1, but rather the oscillation between characters operating on terms of normal sexuality is, according to Sartre, sadistic masochistic. Sobel. This form of sexuality is not caring, but entirely selfish and implicitly empty. It even promotes crazed and unjustified action. Table of share. Table of contents. Button. Selected. Grid. Page 19. Page 19. Page 2. Such as Pelletier, Norton, and Espinosa's murdering of a taxi driver, which ascribes to Augustine's belief that so possessing is this sexual pleasure, that at the moment of time which it is consummated, all mental activity is suspended. Sobel. A system of objectification is created by a culture centered on what Marx calls a fetishism of commodities. Marx. Such a society determines that all social relations, even those outside of production, are determined by the mediation of objects. Thus people have no real relationship outside of this exchange. The mediated objects, some object of value, in Part 1 are the sources of sexual pleasure to be extracted from the three characters, which once consumed, only promotes a continual pattern of consumption and not satisfaction. In this way, the method of each character determining the other's use value in terms of their available deposit of sexual pleasure allows room for their desire to be cyclically met and unmet. As Plato voices concern in Symposium that what we think, consciously, we want in our erotic affairs is not really what we want. Eros, our yearning desire for attractive bodies and excellent minds, is really eros for an ideal beauty that is barely represented by the objects of our attachments. We think happiness will result from relationships with beautiful people, but we are dissatisfied. Sobel. In conclusion, the layers of self-created pressure revolving around the need to attain sexual satisfaction and the means by which these characters attempt to acquire it promote a system of instability and, in a sense, cyclical meaninglessness. And yet Pelletier, Norton, and Espinosa expend excessive amounts of effort in their sexual quest toward nothingness. To existence itself. 2 exist. Table of content. Page 20. Page 20. Remember, the idea isn't to find things. It's to not find them. Roberto Bolaño. Why can't we stay closed up inside ourselves? Why do we chase after expression and form, trying to deliver ourselves of our precious contents or meanings, desperately attempting to organize what is after all a rebellious and chaotic process? B.M. Sharon, on the heights of despair. Amalfitano. Part 2. The part about Amalfitano begins with an epithet of what it means for. I don't know what Amalfitano to both exist in Santa Teresa and exist in a much more existential context. I don't know what I'm doing in Santa Teresa, Amalfitano said to himself after he'd been living in the city for a week. Don't you? Don't you really? He asked himself. Really, I don't, he said to himself, and that was as eloquent as he could be. Independent. Bolaño. 163. These two issues, though causative, remain at first dependent but then move toward an independent relationship with each other. The latter issue, concerning the semblance, or attempts made of understanding the nature of man's existence as articulated, and unarticulated, by Amalfitano, demonstrate a surface or a platform representing the impossibility of understanding our existential disposition, which formulates itself as yet another extended surface of the meaninglessness of such semblances. Amalfitano, a declared non-existent professor at a non-existent university, straddles himself within the throes of confronting what it means to exist while living in the industrial dystopia of Santa Teresa, a setting that Andrew McCann labels as possessing an impalpable sense of menace through the poor neighborhoods described as lame or blind or mutilated, a sunset likened to a carnivorous flower. A sauna looks like a bunker holding a corpse, and most tellingly, a prison described as looking like a woman who's been hacked to pieces. 114, 129, 158, 299, McCann. The land is not. Table of content. Select. Page 21. Page 21. Barren, but rather destitute and plagued with projecting a mystified image of the landscape. Home button to the left. Portrait. Barren, but rather destitute and plagued with projecting a mystified image of Mexico. Landscape. Home button to the right. Portrait. Barren, but rather destitute and plagued with projecting a mystified image of Mexico as a land saturated with death. Norvillo Corvalin. During an interview, Bolaño claims the depiction of Santa Teresa as a nightmarish city is rooted in an Anglophone literary tradition that portrays Mexico as an oxymoronic infernal paradise. McCann. It is within this constructed environment of intensity and death that the character Amalfitano is able to provoke Sartre's existential platform that existence precedes essence. 89 and placid. Injected into a chaotic state of raising a daughter, Rosa, teaching philosophy at visited by the 89 and Placid University, losing his wife, Lola, to insanity. Madness is contagious. Being
oh my god.
Visited by the ghost of his grandfather.
Oh my god. And
recently moving to the deplorable city of Santa Teresa.
Oh my god.
Amalfitano
Little
finds
bitch has a lot of
himself
fire,
in
no?
disposition to question existence. 177.
I have so much respect for that shit. The garlic.
2,666 shifts Amalfitano between descriptions of his placement in Santa Teresa and emphatic recounts of his philosophical inquiry, both of which bemoan a general sense of alienation. Moments marking the material structure of Amalfitano's environment, such as the living room was empty and quiet, and the lights were off. Anyone listening carefully on the porch would have heard the whine of a few mosquitoes. But no one was listening. The houses next door were silent and dark. Promote a visually bleak coffin of inactivity and lonesomeness within which Amalfitano exists. 106. 8A note on the university. The University of Santa Teresa was like a cemetery that suddenly beings to think in vain. It also was like an empty dance club. I like that. 85. 9 briefly mentioning it here because this paper will not expound upon the emotional or psychological associations concerning Amalfitano's use of Lola, to madness. This quote illustrates the intensity of the situation of loss, and yet this vision of Lola lingered in his mind for many years, like a memory rising up from glacial seas, although in fact he hadn't seen anything. Which meant there was nothing to remember, only the shadow of his ex-wife projected on the neighboring buildings in the beam of the streetlights. And then dream. Lola walking off down one of the highways out of St. Cugat. Walking along the side of the road. An almost deserted road since most cars took the new toll highway to save time. A woman bowed by the weight of her suitcase. Fearless. Walking fearlessly along the side of the road. 185. 8A note on the university. The University of Santa Teresa was like a cemetery that suddenly beings to think. Table of content. Select. Page 20. Page 22. Page 22. Amalfitanos. 10 voice. The form of alienation surrounding Amalfitano isn't the trite urban alienation. 10 voiced by poets such as T.S. Eliot in Prophet, but rather a stabbing solipsism. One of Amalfitano's philosophical concepts that tread the outline of the emptiness created by Santa Teresa is his idiosyncratic ideas about jet lag. He believed, or liked to think he believed, that when a person was in Barcelona, the people living and present in Buenos Aires and Mexico City didn't exist. The time difference only masked their non-existence. And so if you suddenly traveled to cities that, according to this theory, didn't exist or hadn't yet had time to put themselves together, the result was the phenomenon known as jet lag, which arose not from your exhaustion but from the exhaustion of the people who would still have been asleep if you hadn't traveled.
How do you know? How do you know about that?
Is experienced through a Bolano, 189, since the dawn of Descartes, who instigated the notion that the ego revealed by the cogito is experienced through a solitary consciousness, a res cogitans, not sourced in the body but assured of its own existence exclusively as a conscious mind. The limited viewpoint that I am the only mind which exists has permeated philosophy and literature. Descartes, Thornton. For Amalfitano, this theory is the product of a deductive mind. Is experienced through a show more search menu. 11 centered on a singular experiential perspective, which propels solipsistic statements at 11 centered on a singular experiential perspective, which propels solipsistic statements as when a person was in Barcelona, the people living and present in Buenos Aires and he believed, or liked to think he believed, that when a person was in Barcelona, the people living in 11 when a person was in Barcelona, the people living and present in Buenos Aires and Mexico City didn't exist. 189. However, this theory combined with the vocal sketches
of Santa Teresa as a manifestation of underlying death fixation offset the significance of such a theory.
Portrait, library, account, cover of 2666, bookmark, library, button. Of such a theory and instead demonstrates it more so as a product of an intensely lonely mind, Norvillo Corvalin. Even Amalfitano discounts the legitimacy of his thoughts by identifying them as a mechanism of turning the pain of others into memories of one's. 10 emblematically characterized by such a lines in the love song of J. Alfred landscape, portrait, library, button, is 10 emblematically characterized by such a lines in the love song of J. Alfred Crawford as shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves, leaning out of windows. Ellipsis. Eliot, 11 not to fully discount solipsism. John Locke determined that reflection, which is introspection or inner experience, is the primary source for all psychological concepts. Landscape, portrait, show more items, table of contents.
It's not true. It's not a true
table
lie.
of contents. So, page 23. Page 23.
Coming?
They turn pain, which is natural, enduring, and eternally triumphant, into personal memory, which is human, brief,
What
and
did you gonna
eternally
say, bro?
elusive. 189.
Shut up.
Operating on a physical
Shut
level
up,
to materially ground part 2's
Okay,
existentialistic.
She saw my fucking
And
shit.
my daughter will be super happy. Let's bring
Foundation.
my daughter wants to go
Amalfitano
everywhere.
enacts an experiment,
Everywhere.
which Michael Sprinker
Are you actually
determines is
serious?
not.
Yes,
Your
he
dad's
want-
coming here?
Yes, he want to buy all of this.
Ah, I understand. Because your aunt died.
What did you?
Huh?
Where we took my daughter?
Specific or empirical knowledge
Oh,
on
yeah,
modes
oh,
of
yeah.
production,
Mhm.
but the aesthetic.
Okay, there's full question, bro.
Opening double quotation mark. Performance. Apprehension of those structures as they are presented in the phenomenon
Okay,
of
let
the
me write so make
theatrical.
a list.
Performance. Deco. Having read a section from a Calvin Tompkins essay.
Hey, I just gotta.
which,
Actually, the sickest. I got all the information to answer that. You ready for this shit?
Details Marcel Duchamp instructions for newlyweds to hang a geometry book by strings on the
First of all,
balcony of their
how long am I
apartment so
here for?
that the wind could go through the book.
Alright,
Choose
guess what
it.
now? Guess what? You ready for this shit? You ready for this shit? Are you
Yes.
ready to listen to what I'm gonna say next? Your dad's gonna have an exhibition of his sculpture pieces here, bitch. And I had the Asian girl on the violinist, electric violinist. Huh?
I will bring like a just clothes.
Wait a minute, we can bring 1, 2, 3. Exactly, just 2 or 3. And the rest is just kind of a historical, like, visual, like, you and your photos, printing, printing photos from the computer, and then also drawing your dad. Drawing sculpture, drawing Fuji, having the comic of Fuji. It's all about your fucking dad, bro. What's his name again? Yeah, Benicio, that's it. VC is the name of the fucking exhibition.
My daughter.
Own problems. Turn and tear out the pages. Amalfitano replicates the performance
Oh my god,
in
so
his
this is dope. This is like to give you the most pyro exhibition ever.
own
You gotta have Mateo to
Deckard
come.
state. Own problems.
Also, all
Turn and tear
oh my
out
god,
the pages.
everyone. It's super
Amalfitano
fucking dope.
replicates the
Can you imagine your
performance
dad
in
comes
his.
here after his friend got shot by a German, and then he has this VC exhibition, bro? I know! I know, but the exhibition shit, yes. Your mom's gonna be like, because we're gonna do the classy, you know what I mean? And it's VC, bro. I mean, I bring the heavy hitters. I bring the fucking, like, the Lutzes. I bring my fucking people from my magazine, my nerds, Calvin, intellectual. I bring that fucking energy to the VC. And your parents shocked. Your parents are worshiping. Lucas? Not Dima?
Own version with decent
Not Dima?
testamento
She plays Mark, so
geometrica.
Mark has to be here trying to sell
191. The
VC
objective
shit.
is, as Sherry.
I love that vibe. That's genius. Mark
Deckard
trying to sell our
states,
artwork
to reveal
at
the
our
essence of
exhibition.
the
I
lines,
love
representing
it.
time
Genius.
as they pass. As taking one of Deckard's taking.
Yeah, me too.
They wear down and thereby mark up the words.
Nita DJing. Nita
Deckard.
DJing in the kitchen.
Through the
Fine.
process of taking one of Duchamp's
No,
whimsical
this is when I
acts
get my
that
Dior.
disparages
I
the
get the
seriousness
suit
of
for
a
this
book
fucking
full
thing, Mara. And I wear the suit
of
and I'm fucking.
principles. Amalfitano adopts an entirely serious yet apathetic perspective toward the produced.
We also invite Little B
definitively
to perform. I'm gonna invite Little B to perform, bro.
performance
And
12
this
that
is
acts
Claudia
both as a
Villa song.
representation
Little B
of the
singing Claudia Villa
meaninglessness
song,
in
bro.
attempting to
After you saw your photo there, you become and
No, I like the photos. They're sick. An animal?
produce
I gotta-
definitively
'cause I need a
objective
remix.
statements about the nature of our existence and the
I need a
dilemmas
remix.
of a semblance
So
of
Little B
reality centered on
singing Claudia Villa songs with the
existentialism.
Asian girl.
191.
Yeah, bro.
12 concerning the performative act. Alejandro
He's
Jodorowsky
down.
writes in Psychomagic.
He's down. I got the whole concept.
transformative
Dude,
power
this
of
Little B
shamanic
did a perform
psychotherapy.
at your
I came
VC
to
fucking
realize that
exhibition.
if I had,
Claudia
in
Villa
my
songs,
theatrical
okay, and the Asian girls
expression,
did it.
shattered form,
And then boom.
space, the relationship
It lines
between
up the
actor and
production for that.
spectator,
Oh my God.
I had not yet attacked time. In
Do
Mexico,
you have a date?
I
Do you have the
invented
dates?
what
Do you
I
have the
called
dates?
the
Exact
ephemeral
dates?
panic.
You don't have
which
exact date.
consisted
We
in
need the
staging a
exact
show
date,
that could be
bitch.
presented only once.
Oh my god.
It had to be accomplished by introducing perishable things, smoke, fruits, jelly, live animals.
I mean,
4
this
full
thing.
stops. It had to do
Okay,
with
so,
accomplishing acts that could not
We
ever
need
be
to have a
repeated.
talk about your dad.
In summary,
'Cause
I wanted
I
the
gotta
theater,
ask a bunch of
instead of
questions
tending toward the fixed,
of
to
all the
death,
shit I don't know.
to
Okay?
return to its uniqueness, the instantaneous,
When you're ready,
the
you wanna talk
fugitive,
now, or like,
the only moment forever.
dude.
This way, theater is made in the image of life where,
Okay, other places your
according
dad
to a
needs to
saying
go.
by Heraclitus of Ephesus, one never bathes in the same river. Thus, to conceive the theater was to carry it to the extreme, to go to the paroxysm of this art form. Through the happenings, I rediscovered the theatrical act and its therapeutic potential. Jodorowsky. Table of contents. Page 24. Page 24. Every day, even multiple times, Amalfitano walked outside to the clothesline to observe the book or watch it through the window from inside, using it as a habitual placeholder to his existential displacement in Santa Teresa. Another morning he thought that any work he did to make the yard nicer would ultimately be pointless, since he didn't plan to stay in Santa Teresa long. Ellipsis. And then he asked himself, what made me come here? Why did I bring my daughter to this cursed city? Because it was one of the few hellholes in the world I hadn't seen yet. Because I really just want to die. And then he looked at Deist's book, the Testamento Geometrico, hanging impassively from the line, held there by 2 clothespins, and he felt the urge to take it down and wipe off the ochre dust that had begun to cling to it here and there. But he didn't dare. Bolano, 196. In his attempt to reconstruct the history of thought, Amalfitano efforts are lost in the impassivity of his surroundings and the slow, unpoetic movement of the Testamento Geometrico swaying decade. If the object of analysis in this passage remains the I signified as Amalfitano, then the Testamento Geometrico experiment is an experiment in solipsistic will. Descartes' analysis on the experiment is that if Amalfitano is the subject of contemplation, the truth of history is ahistorical, time is an epiphenomenon, and the cause and meaning of human actions are transcendental abstractions. Signifies that the latent abstractions and queries of existence, even when met by material experiments, can only provoke more abstraction, articulate or not. Descartes. Such abstractions can only imprison Amalfitano into an existential box.
Yeah, bitch, that's what I'm talking about. Thank you, finally. That's what I'm talking about. Beyond always.
Relies on a concentration of consciousness. Husserl de landscape.
Fucking Jew.
Impassivity of his Bolano, 196. In his attempt to reconstruct the history of thought, Amalfitano efforts are lost in the semblance of existence, as gestured by Amalfitano's replicated experience, relies on a concentration of consciousness.
Yeah, what the fuck
Husserl
is
determines consciousness to be the
She was like all
transcendental field of
techno jungle.
intentionality
She was all
wherein our
techno jungle.
experience is meaningful. An experience of something as something. Stanford. The individual engages in activities that he perceives as meaningful in order to procure some form of meaning. Structure. Table of contents. Selected. Page 25. Page 25. Feeling the 13 feeling the urge to take it down and wipe off the ochre dust that 13 and thus the I, in relation to the individual, is determined by the authenticity of his 13 approach to such activities.
Well, yeah, dude, come on.
Of Amalfitano. When this finished feeling the urge to take it down and wipe off the ochre dust that had begun to cling to it here and there, but he didn't dare, does not correspond to an authenticity of will that would allow him to commit himself to,
and have like,
and thus become what it entails.
let's have flow for like
Heidegger
30 minutes,
posits that
20 minutes.
Is
he comes out with like this fetish like chain and his box is like this like fetish, like he's in kind of a prison and he's just eating raw fish. Naked, Mara. No, like this. No. It's like this, Mara. And in the back of a little bit, seeing Claudia Villa, bitch. With the Asian bitch. Game over. It's gonna glitch the fuck out of Igor.
The indifference Amalfitano holds for his job, Santa Teresa, and existence is a result of the state of alienation he finds himself in, which produces the intentionality of anxiety that both Heidegger and Sartre believe reveals fundamental aspects of the self. Stanford, the dry, unemotional, and almost banal language used to position Amalfitano in Santa Teresa automatically saturates him, regardless of his engagement with the world, in an irrevocable state of alienation. He had a little single-story house, 3 bedrooms, a full bathroom and a half bathroom, a combined kitchen, living room with windows that faced west, a small brick porch where there was a wooden bench worn by the wind that came from the mountains
Worn by
and
the
sea,
wind of windows,
from the north,
worn by the wind of windows,
the wind that smelled like smoke
worn
and
by the
came
wind
from the
of
south.
windows.
He had books he'd kept for more than 25 years.
And guess what? It's not.
Not many.
We do
All
it public,
of
but
them.
then it's actually
He
only
had books
VIP
he'd bought in
bit.
the last 10 years. Books he didn't mind lending.
Selected.
Books that could have been
We
lost or stolen
open the
for all
public
he
for
cared.
one
He
Claudia
had
Villa
books that he
song.
sometimes received
It's gonna be
neatly
so
packaged
nasty.
and with unfamiliar return addresses. Books he didn't even open anymore. He had a perfect yard for growing
Dude,
grass
we don't
and
even know
planting
yet.
flowers.
No, we
But he
don't
didn't
even know yet.
what
But
flowers
Mustafa
would be
know,
best
ma.
for flowers, as opposed to cacti or succulents. There would be time, so he thought, for gardening. He had a wooden gate that needed a coat of paint.
Game over.
He had a monthly salary. 13 Nietzsche viewed existence, for the strong or creative individual nihilist, in such a way that it is imperative to create meaning and
Does your dad have a
value in
favorite
world
Claudia
from which
Villa?
all transcendent supports have fallen away in order to give
No.
form to one's immediate
Does your dad have like a
inclinations,
favorite Claudia
drives,
Villa?
and passions.
What's the name of it? Huh? Let's listen to that shit right now. But that's your first input. Yeah, okay. And then ask, then say, what's his favorite song?
Landscape.
And then say, what's his favorite
Library.
album?
Button.
And then, who's his second favorite singer? Another favorite singer besides. Do that shit, okay?
Assist portrait. Search. Menu like assistive touch.
That's what you told me.
Assistive touch.
That's so sick.
Mail. 20.709 unread emails. Double mail. 20.709.
Yeah, bro.
Assistive touch. Mail. Settings. Now. Assistive touch. Books. Done. Button. Library. Button.
I am, bitch.
Account. Library. Tab.
I am, bitch.
Select Gmail. Unknown author. 0% fixed. Button.
I had to do it
Actions
for the
available.
family.
Bookmarked. Library. Cal Communication. Ringo Lucas. Tameru 1123 Isle. Me. Linagra Sasuda. Plus the 7th of June 19 details. Hello everybody. I am writing to you to explain a few things about the cosine conception as it stands so far. I know some of you are not yet sure whether they will be able to contribute, but I wanted to include you in the process anyway.
Shit, bro.
A few days ago, Lena and I talked about releasing a small self-made zine including photos of cows I took in the Black Forest, accompanied by some texts, prose, poetry, rants plus, loosely linked to these pictures, in whichever way, written by us. Since there seems to be a lot of people interested in contributing works of their own, which is amazing, I hereby invite everybody to come up with haikus, elegies, sonnets, streams of consciousness or whatever you will find fitting. There is no page chooser. Page 1. Adjustable. Double tap and hold. Then drag left or right to change the page. Swipe up or down with one finger to adjust the value.
Right now. Yes. No, aesthetics.
Library. Button. Library. Edit. Button. 2006. 2660 library button. The indifference Amalfitano
Hey, but
holds for his
I
job.
like the
Santa
things
Teresa, and existence is a result of the
You made such a good argumentation, though.
The indifference Amalfitano
Hey,
holds
don't
for his
actually
job.
do about the
Santa
spear the shit out of my
Teresa,
rock.
and existence is a result of the state of alienation he finds himself in, which produces the intentionality of anxiety that both Heidegger and Sartre believe reveals fundamental aspects of the self. Stanford. The dry, unemotional, and almost banal language used to position Amalfitano in Santa Teresa automatically saturates him, regardless of his engagement with the world, in an irrevocable state of alienation. He had a little single-story house, 3 bedrooms, a full bathroom and a half bathroom, a combined kitchen living room dining room with windows that faced west. A small brick porch where there was a wooden bench worn by the wind that came from the mountains and the sea. The wind from the north. The wind through the gaps. The wind that smelled like smoke and came from the south. He had books he'd kept for more than 25 years. Not many. All of them old. He had books he'd bought in the last 10 years. Books he didn't mind lending. Books that could have been lost or stolen for all he cared. He had books that he sometimes received neatly packaged and with unfamiliar return addresses. Books he didn't even open anymore. He had a perfect yard for growing grass and planting flowers, but he didn't know what flowers would be best there. Flowers, as opposed to cacti or succulents. There would be time, so he thought, for gardening. He had a wooden gate that needed a coat of paint. He had a monthly salary. 13 Nietzsche viewed existence. The strong or creative individual nihilist, in such a way that it is imperative to create meaning and value in a world from which all transcendent supports have fallen away in order to give form to one's immediate inclinations. Drugs and passions.
That's sick. I've never had that flex on that dick.
Okay.
You've had that flex on that dick? Have you had that flex on that dick?
2,600.
Have you had that flex on that dick, bro?
2,600. Library.
Okay, why not, bro?
Library. Button.
Oh my god, it's so caked up in his dick. My mom's gay, bro. I told you, bro. 7 fucking Octobers ago.
2,600.
I don't know, it doesn't matter that much.
Table of content. Selected.
Already came out of that.
Page 26. Page 14. This time phraseology. This description of Amalfitano's house lacks any relatable significance.
Oh my god, don't kike out like that, dude. You deserve a fucking medal, you know what I mean?
Selected. Page 25. Page 25. He had a little single-story house. 3 bedrooms. A full bathroom and a half
Shit, I'm so
bathroom.
kiked on
A
that.
combined library.
You know what I mean?
Button. 2006. List view. Grid view. Roland Barthes Incidents 1. Master Clerk. 10. Country Best. Library. Library. Roland Barthes Incidents 1. Roland Barthes Incidents. Country Best. Table of content. Tape selected. Page 1. Page 1. Image. Printed. The light of the southwest. Today, the 17th of July. Look close. Today, the 17th of July. The weather is splendid. Sitting on the garden bench and squinting so as to obliterate all perspective, the way children do, I see a daisy in the flower, flattened against the meadow on the other side of the road. This road flows past like a calm river, occasionally traveled by a motorbike or a tractor. Those are the real sounds of the country now, ultimately no less poetic than birdsong, infrequent. They emphasize nature's silence and stamp it with the discrete signs of human activity. The road will... Landscape. Home button to the left. Portrait. My southwest is similarly extend. Table of content. Selected. Grid view. Button. 1 of 2. Page 8. Tonsorials. Moham. Or other. Sulky. Shows no interest and immediately decides that it's the machine that is defective. All of which is not much in every afternoon of Ramadan. Around 5. This is November. The restaurant Dalal. Tonsorials. My Shoshin boy. Bending over my feet. Reveals the huge bald spot on the back of his skull. The same day. On the one hand, The petit bourgeois student stupidly showing off for the others in order to stick the prof, who contradicts me with a statement so ridiculous that nothing remains in it. On the other, Mustafa, called Muster, hair cropped, fine almond-shaped eyes, an almost Roman head except for the sweetness of his expression, born in Fez. He is 18 and too poor to continue. Table of content. Page 9. Page 9. Editor. His studies. Looking for work in Rabat. He has taken a job with a carpenter at Acre. He earns 3,500 francs a week. His father does nothing. His mother works in a textile factory. He lives with one of his sisters. A being devoid of any hostility. A determined little French woman, whose puny lover is carrying huge suitcases. Answers the ticket collector. You've got quite a load there. They're such thieves. These poor undetermined young compatriots.
I wasn't paying
with girls to
attention.
show
Please,
off
can you do
for,
it?
pretending to speak English with an exaggerated French accent. A way of concealing the fact, without losing face,
Can you please
that
do
they
it?
will never have a good accent. Medina, at 6 in the
Come on,
evening,
please.
in the street studded with peddlers. One sad fellow offers a single chopping board on the edge of the sidewalk. Behind me, on the plain, an old French lady, chatting with the woman beside her, is doing needlepoint, a greyish piece of buckram with old-fashioned bouquets drawn on it. Later, not getting off at the intermediate stop, she continued her work during the landing and the takeoff. Absolutely static amid the plane's movements. Imperturbable figure. Two conductors, off duty, sitting at the bar. The younger one hands a cup of coffee to the older man, who refuses with a smile. Later, I realize that the older man is only an assistant. He has only 1 star on his cap. The younger man has 3. In the train, there are around me, 1, a woman traveling alone. She has a Teutonic accent, Alsatian, Swiss. Wears a ponytail with a scarf knotted around it. She tries to make contact with me. Accepts a lunch tray when I do.
Please, because I want to
Orders
get up
nothing
and I
to
want
drink,
to work
then
on
wants
something.
sells a water,
And I just like would
ice,
prefer it,
etc.
close it,
She
dark,
is reading
please.
Riff, Terre de Legends.
I like
2,
low-key
a black
lighting. That's
Moroccan
why I'm good
woman.
at film. I'm all about
Pustular.
low-key
She wears a
lighting.
wine-colored caftan and
Lift
high-button
out
shoes
the
and
fucking
holds a kinky-haired
visual
baby in
into a
her
muffler,
arms.
sound, and
3,
created by
a
the
modest
visual.
Piedmont woman doing some kind of complicated
Okay.
crochet stitch.
Mhm.
4, 2 lesbians playing
This one
cards.
too, please.
5, a young Moroccan, barefoot. Group taxi, a député from Taiwan, an architect. He has built a whole street in Madrid, which has made him a multimillionaire. Directs through the dark and the rain our old taxi driver, grey work shirt and yellow skull cap, who sees nothing. By loud, abrupt, metallic interjections. The way, 34 you drive an old carriage horse. Moreover a perfectly docile one. L0wR Workers Cooperative, a flock of little girls huddled together like birds and cheeping over huge carpets hung in front of them. A mixture of aviary and classroom. From this to the Sadean Seraglio. Adito, looking out over a huge, noble landscape. One of us jokingly gives a picture of a naked woman, from some playboy or other, to young Moha, who sells semi-precious stones, smiles, reserve, seriousness, remoteness on the boy's part. He is the one who masters a scene initially intended to ridicule him. The other boy's hysteria remains here, on the distaff side. And Al-Qaeda, a boy with shining eyes and an imperious smile, endowed with an absolute friendliness, manifesting in all its glory, beyond any form of culture, the very essence of charity, no other word for it, Tanahi. 2 hippie hitchhikers. Ideology, one of them talks to me about the stream of consciousness. Economy, going to Marrakesh to buy Indian shirts, which they will sell at very high prices in Holland. Ritual, as soon as they are in the back of the car, they roll cigarettes and deliberately, mechanically plunge into absence, from which they awake as soon as they are offered a coffee. But also, at Setot, I picked up a hitchhiker 12 years old. He carries a huge plastic bag filled. Finished moving. Search. Menu item. In the train. Notification. More. In the train. there are around me. 1. A woman. Page chooser. Page 9. Page chooser. 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 Page 30. Page chooser. Zeus. There are a lot of people. The futile evening. Stormy and not at all warm. Rainy. Hostile wind. Zeus. There are a lot of people. The usual vernissage conversations. There's a lot of shit on the walls. But not all. Remarks one gentleman in glasses. Found one theater where they were showing Pilots film about kids passing their baccalaureate. G.r.a. Library. Button. Book. Manually. Button. Recent. Button. Title. Button. Roland Barthes Incidents 1. Master Clerk. 2666. Library. Button. Feeling the urge to take it down. The indifference Amalfitano holds, and thus the I, in relation to the individual, is determined by the authenticity of 13 approach to such activities. The jaded passiveness of Amalfitano, when described as feeling the urge to take it down and wipe off the ochre dust that had begun to cling to it here and there, but he didn't dare, does not correspond to an authenticity of will that would allow him to commit himself to and thus become what it entails. 196. Stanford. Heidegger firmly posits that practical identity is predicated by practices I engage in, and, when these collapse I am not anything. Stanford. The indifference Amalfitano holds for his job, Santa Teresa, and existence is a result of the state of alienation he finds himself in, which produces the intentionality of anxiety that both Heidegger and Sartre believe reveals fundamental aspects of the self. Stanford. The dry, unemotional, and almost banal language used to position Amalfitano in Santa Teresa automatically saturates him, regardless of his engagement with the world, in an irrevocable state of alienation. He had a little single-story house. 3 bedrooms, a full bathroom and a half bathroom, a combined kitchen, living room, dining room with windows that faced west, a small brick porch where there was a wooden bench worn by the wind that came from the mountains and the sea, the wind from the north, the wind through the gaps, the wind that smelled like smoke and came from for more than 25 years. Not many. All of them old. He had books he'd bought in the last 10 years. Books he didn't mind landscape. 13. Nietzsche viewed existence, for the strong or creative individual nihilist, in such a way that it is imperative to create meaning and value in a world from which all transcendent supports have fallen away in order to give form to one's immediate inclinations, drives, and passions. Stanford. Table of page 26. Page 22. This description of Amalfitano's house lacks any relational signifiers, either emotional or psychological, that would allow for a human connection between Amalfitano and his house to be assumed. Out of all the objects described, bedroom, bathroom, half bathroom, kitchen, living room, dining room, windows, porch, bend, books, yard, wooden gate, salary, only one of them, the yard, presents a conditional statement, which invariably negates the condition presented. There would be time 14, so he thought, for gardening. 163. Even when the books, which is the main tool for a philosophy professor, are treated, no mention is made as to their function or use. They are merely described in terms of their materiality as an object.
For tobacco.
The jutting rhythm of the last 2 lines.
I need tobacco. I don't have any. I want to smoke weed.
Foster an atmosphere of repetition that discounts any seeming
I come with you. What the
to be
fuck?
found in the passage as a whole. Thus Amalfitano's detachment and non-relationship to his environment alienates him from even himself. Amalfitano's anxiety about being in Santa Teresa, landscape, portrait, library, button.
What is that? I'm coming right now. Hey, fucking kite, bro. Kite out, bro.
Library. Button. Landscape. Page 2. Page 2. Landscape. Home button to the left.
No.
Portrait.
Hey, no. No. Did you see?
Page 1.
No. Don't throw my art away.
No, you already checked.
No, I didn't.
Yes.
I need to check. Hey, stop. Hey, stop being weird. Come on. Ah, you already.
3 p.m.
Leave me alone.
Assistive touch. Assistive
Where?
touch menu. Double
Oh,
tap
okay,
to
I'm
open the assistive touch. Assistive
I
touch
would
menu.
put a fucking bitch on it.
Assist books. Books. Assistive touch edit button. Done. Assistive touch. Assistive touch assist book. Assistive touch. Assistive touch menu. Assist home. Assist home.
The pop.
301.
Enough, you know. Rebecca.
BTX
Fuck
gone large.
Fuck it, Rebecca.
Button.